Hey my Patriot fans, welcome back to Colonial Girl Liz. Before we get into today's video, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, comment, subscribe, and turn on your post notifications so you can post notified when I post a new video. I post every Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. Let's get started with today's video. Before we get started in today's video, I'm sorry if I'm not as enthusiastic as I was. Today, tomorrow, and Friday I have to take a state test, MCAS. For those of you who live in Massachusetts, it stands for Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System, so just bear with me here if I'm not as enthusiastic, but I'm going to try my best, and I did promise you videos on Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. But let's get started. So today I'm reading 1796, The Portrait. It's about, we'll bore with the light here. It's about Washington going in, George Washington, the first president, going into his presidency and getting his portrait done for president. So this should be interesting. So let's get into it. 1796, The Portrait. There was no man in the United States more famous, more admired, more sought after than George Washington. In fact, it had taken all his power to prevent the grateful country from crowning him as America's first king. Now people flocked around their first president, hoping a word from the great hero of revolution, or a glimpse, just a glimpse, portraits in great demand. Of all the portraits of the day, the best was Gilbert Stuart. He painted all the leading figures of the revolution and the new republic, and his reputation grew every year. By 1796, he had already painted Washington twice, and made him a good innocent by copying those two portraits. Stuart could dash off a copy in 2 hours, paintbrush flying. He himself wasn't quite satisfied with his first two likenesses of president, however, and he yearned for another chance. Unfortunately, a president has more to do than sit as still as a statue for hours at a time. When Washington did agree to sit for portraits, he didn't disguise his boredom. Stuart complained that at one sitting the president had a grim and silent refusing to be drawn into conversation, and eventually had fallen asleep. No wonder those paintings were unsatisfactory. Stuart's third chance came from Mrs. Washington. She had decided that she would have two portraits, one of her husband and one of herself. Reluctantly, Washington agreed to sit for Stuart again, only because he was promised that when the pictures were finished, they would be given to his wife. On a fine April morning, he rode to the painter's studio. Stuart's daughter, Jane, peeked out from behind the parlor door as the great man entered and decided that he was the most superb-looking person she had ever seen. In the eyes of his fellow Americans, Washington was almost a god. But his deity just been fitted with a new pair of false teeth. They were uneasy in the mouth and bulged my lips out in such a manner to make them appear considerable swelled. He was scheduled to be painted. Stuart had to take what he could get in an attempt to enliven the mood and bring some expression to the president's face. He invited several of Washington's friends to the studio to make conversation. The artist worked quickly, concentrating on the face and leaving the rest of the canvas bare to be finished later. A word got around in Philadelphia that Stuart was working on a new portrait of Washington. People began to come to the studio to see the work in progress. Unlike many portraits of famous people, this had no symbols of glory or greatness. There was no triumphant laurel wreaths or Roman columns. Instead, the president was depicted as a common man dressed in a common black coat. This was the perfect representation of a democracy's leader. Before Stuart had a chance to finish the painting, he was deluged with requests for copies. So instead of finishing the portrait, he kept it half done and began to make copies of it. 3 times the president came to the studio asking for the painting to give to his wife. But as Stuart pointed out, it wasn't finished yet. Finally Washington gave up in disgust. Martha Washington never did get the portrait. It was worth too much for Stuart for him to part with it. He made at least 72 painted copies of the picture, and it wasn't long before engravers were copying it, as well to print on sheet music, newspapers, and posters. It was to become the most famous and most often copied portrait in America, owned by everyone. It is the face on our $1 bill. Sorry, I was in the Maleficent, so I couldn't show you this picture. I'm sure you saw it in the beginning of this video, but I'm going to show it to you again. A little blurry here. So, the thing about Washington's presidency was that back when Washington was the first president, we didn't have Democratic or Republican. He was for both Democratic or Republican. Washington didn't really have a party, and the politics back then, but yeah. That's very weird because now it's Republican or Democrat, but he didn't have a party. But yeah. So that's it for today's video. Make sure to like this video, comment, subscribe, and turn on your post notifications so you get notified when I post a new video. I post every Sunday, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. So that's it for today's video. Make sure to subscribe. Peace out, my Patriot friends.